Hi everyone and welcome back. Today I'll be painting this Heretic trooper from Trench Crusade, and I'll be demonstrating an effective way to get some Grimdark infantry onto the tabletop in as little time as possible. If you find this useful, please give the video a like and subscribe to the channel, and let's get into it. So I'm going to start off with a grey primer and then move on to some Basilicanum grey contrast, and I'm just going to give the whole model a good coat with this. Then I'm going to move on to Wildwood Contrast from Citadel, and I'm just going to be painting all of the areas that are going to be either leather or metallic. So on this particular model, I'd already applied some texture paint prior to priming the model, so I'm just going to give that a coat of the Wildwood contrast as well. I'm then going to base coat all of the metallics with gunmetal from MIG, and I'm going to be applying this in a stippling motion. I chose this paint mainly for its colour, but also because it's quite thick, but if you don't have this particular paint, just use any kind of dark metallic metal colour that you've got. You'll get a very similar effect. I have to apologise for the what seems like shift in lighting on the video here. I'm not 100% sure what's causing it because the lighting's not actually changing. I think it's something to do with the autofocus on the camera, so maybe the white gloves or the grey background is kind of throwing it off a little bit. So I'll try and fix that on the next video. I do have quite a basic setup at the moment, so something that I need to invest in. But yeah, apologies for that. We'll try and improve that on the next one. I'm then going to move on to light metal from MIG. I'm going to do the same thing over all of the armor panels, all of the metallics, just in a stippling motion, not very much paint on the brush. This is a really bright paint, so this will make the metallics look really bright, but we're going to come and dull them back down in a moment. Next I'm going to be moving on to some rust from Dirty Down, and I'm going to be stippling this over all of those metallic areas that we've just painted. And I'm going to put 2 or 3 layers of stippling very lightly over all of the metallics, and by building up the stippling layers it does add some actual physical texture to the model. It's only very subtle, but it does make a difference. Once that's done, I'm going to move on to some highlights on the fabric, and for this I'm going to be using Vallejo medium sea grey. And I'm going to try and be fairly careful with this, but not overly careful. So as you can see, I'm not doing a really precise kind of layer highlight like you might usually expect to see. This is all going to be covered in a minute, so this is just to kind of add some volume to the cloth that we see there, and just trying to keep it onto the upper areas really. I'm then just going to reinforce those highlights with some Celestra Grey from Citadel, and much the same thing as the previous step. I'm going to be using some stippling on some of the larger areas just to add a little bit of texture, but the main aim is just to reinforce those previous highlights that we just applied. I'm then just going to use this chipping colour from MIG, just because it's the right colour brown that I was looking for, just to highlight all of the brown kind of leather areas. And I'm also going to dry brush this over the base. Same as with the metallics, if you're planning on following this video and you don't have that particular paint, I know it's not a very common one, just use any kind of medium brown that you've got in your collection. It will do exactly the same job. This was just the one that I had to hand. And then next I'm just going to reinforce those highlights on the leather with some Rakarth flesh from Citadel. And much the same thing as before, just hitting the very highest areas this time. And I'm using stippling motion quite a lot just to add some texture and a bit more interest to those leather pieces. Then I'm going to move on to some oil paints, and I'm going to do a thin wash of raw umber mixed with white spirits all over the model. And you have to accept my apologies here, I forgot to press record when I applied most of this, so all I've done is just applied that thin wash over all of the model, just making sure it gets into all of the recesses. And then since I've already got the white spirit out, I'm just going to apply some enamel mud effects to the base, and also some of this to the lower leg areas. So I'm using dark mud and fresh mud from AK Interactive. I'm just stippling these on, and then once you've kind of stippled your areas on, if you like, I'm just going to come back in with some white spirits and just kind of blend them together. After that, I've just given it a quick blast with the hairdryer before moving on to the next step. I'm just going to take a makeup sponge. I've got one end of it I've dipped into the white spirit that I was using earlier. It's a little bit dirty from where I was making the oil washes, but it doesn't really matter too much. And I'm just alternating between the wet end with the white spirit on it and the dry side, and just alternating between the two and just clearing up that oil wash from the raised areas. I'm now just going back to the same light metal paint that we used earlier on to highlight the metallics. I'm just going to go over the metallics again really lightly with this, just catching the edges. I still want it to look rusted, but I just want to make that armour pop a little bit more, especially after the oil wash, because when you put an oil wash on top of metallics it does matte them down quite a lot, so I just want to bring back some of that shine on the edges. Next up is the messiest part of this process. So what I'm doing is I'm just adding some more white spirit to the brown wash that I used earlier. I want to make this really thin and really transparent. And what I'm going to do is I'm just going to flick this kind of all over the model. It'll be a really subtle effect. Yeah, the camera kind of barely picks it up, to be honest, but it just adds some really subtle kind of staining. And as you can see in the background, most of it misses the model, so make sure you've got something down on your work surface or kitchen table or whatever you're using, otherwise you'll have oil paint all over it. Just a few more details left to add now. So what I'm doing here is I'm just painting the eyes with some white ink, and that'll just give a base coat to put some fluorescent red on top of that in a moment. For that I'm just going to use some red ecstasy fluorescent paint from scale 75, and I'm just going to do a couple of thin layers kind of on and around the eyes just to give a red glow. And then once I've applied the fluorescent paint, I'm just coming back in with the white ink, and I'm just putting a tiny white dot kind of in the middle of each eye just to make the glow effect pop a little bit more. I'm then just going to stipple some blood effects on the melee weapon and just kind of on the arm and the cloves, kind of around that area and on that side of his body. I'm just adding a tiny bit of black paint to that blood effects here and just repeating the process. I think this just adds a little bit of variation and makes it look a little bit more realistic. And then all that's left to do is to finish the base. So what I've done is I've added a few tufts, and I think I've used the Army Painter Scorched Tuft, I think they're called. And then I'm just using some of this splash mud from Vallejo, and I'm just stippling that over the base, including over the tufts, just to make them look kind of sodden and wet. and then I'm stippling this on kind of like the lower kind of legs as well. So there we have it. Hope you found the video useful. If you did, please give it a like and subscribe to the channel. And if you've got any thoughts, feedback, questions, or even suggestions for future videos, feel free to drop those in the comments down below. Also, just want to give a quick shout out to our friends at Union County Games in Exeter. If you're ever in the southwest of England and you need any hobby supplies, be sure to pop into UCG and Lewis will help you out. Lastly, I do have some commission slots open for 2025, so if there is anything you'd like painted, feel free to get in touch using the links in the description and we'll see if we can help you out. Thanks for watching guys, and I'll see you on the next one.